In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted with catastrophic force, burying the Roman city of Pompeii under volcanic ash and pumice. The eruption killed thousands instantly, preserved the city in a perfect snapshot of Roman life frozen in time. For nearly 2,000 years, Pompeii remained buried, sealed beneath the ash. When excavations began in the 18th century, archaeologists discovered something extraordinary: thousands of scrolls, papyri, texts written by Roman hands, preserved in the volcanic debris. These were not copies made by later scribes, not accounts written by Greek or medieval historians about Rome. These were the actual words of Romans themselves, written in real time, expressing their thoughts, their business dealings, their fears, their ambitions. But here's the problem: most of these scrolls were too fragile to open. They had been carbonized by the intense heat of the eruption, turned into brittle black cylinders that would crumble to dust if anyone tried to unroll them. For nearly 200 years, thousands of Roman texts sat in museums and archives, unreadable, their contents sealed away. Scholars could see the cylinders, could hold them, could know that they contained words written by Romans, but they could not read what those words said. The knowledge they contained remained locked away, inaccessible, tantalizing in its proximity, but impossible to reach. Then, in recent years, artificial intelligence and advanced imaging technology changed everything. Researchers developed machine learning algorithms trained to read the subtle surface variations on carbonized papyri, to detect the faint impressions of ink that had been preserved in the volcanic ash. They use X-ray imaging, multispectral imaging, and computational analysis to peer inside the sealed scrolls without ever opening them, to detect the letters and words that had been written 2,000 years ago. What they found contradicted nearly everything historians had believed about Roman society, Roman economics, Roman politics, and the daily life of ordinary Romans. What they discovered forced a complete reassessment of how Rome functioned, who held power, what people actually believed and thought and cared about. It revealed that the Roman Empire we thought we understood from literary sources and formal inscriptions was vastly different from the actual lived reality of Romans recorded in their everyday writings. On August 24th, 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted. The eruption was catastrophic, one of the most violent volcanic events in recorded history. A column of ash and pumice rose into the sky, reaching heights of 33 kilometers. The ash rained down on the surrounding region, burying cities and towns under meters of volcanic debris. The intense heat killed people instantly, preserving their bodies in the exact positions they had been in when the ash fell, creating molds that would later reveal their final moments. People trying to shield children, people huddling together, people running. The city of Pompeii was located about 25 kilometers south of Vesuvius. When the eruption occurred, the city was buried under a layer of pumice and ash approximately 3 meters thick. The intensity of the heat and the speed of the burial meant that organic materials that would normally decompose, wood, papyrus, food, human tissue, were partially preserved. The extreme conditions created a kind of time capsule, a frozen moment of Roman life. For nearly 1,700 years, Pompeii lay buried and forgotten. The city was lost to living memory. People knew vaguely that Vesuvius had erupted and had destroyed cities in antiquity, but the specific location of Pompeii was unknown. The buried city became a legend, a ghost, a place that had existed but had vanished from human knowledge. Then, in 1748, excavations began. Archaeologists and treasure hunters started digging through the ash, uncovering buildings, uncovering streets, uncovering the lives that had been preserved in volcanic rock. What they found was stunning: a Roman city perfectly preserved, with houses intact, with businesses still stocked with goods, with graffiti on walls written by Romans who had no idea that their casual scribblings would survive for nearly 2,000 years. And scattered throughout the city, in houses and businesses and libraries, were scrolls. Papyri, the standard writing material of the Roman world, had been carbonized by the intense heat but had survived. They were blackened, brittle, impossible to open without destroying them, but they contained text, They contain the actual words of Romans written in their own hands. The most famous collection of scrolls came from a single house, the House of the Fallen, which belonged to a wealthy Roman named Lucius Caecilius Jucundus. In this house, archaeologists discovered a collection of approximately 154 scrolls and tablets. They were carbonized, blackened, seemingly impenetrable, but they were precious beyond measure because they were not literary texts, not official documents, not the carefully crafted writings of professional authors. They were business documents, personal correspondence, accounting records, the everyday writings of a Roman businessman recording his life and his work. Similar collections were found in other locations around Pompeii. The total number of legible or potentially legible carbonized papyri discovered is estimated in the thousands, but only a tiny fraction have ever been successfully read. The overwhelming majority have remained sealed, unread, their contents unknown. This created a profound frustration for scholars. Here were thousands of texts, actual contemporary accounts written by Romans themselves, preserved by the accident of volcanic eruption. These texts contain information that could not be found anywhere else. The everyday thoughts and concerns of ordinary Romans, the actual functioning of Roman business and commerce, the daily life of people living 2,000 years ago. But the knowledge contained in these texts was locked away, inaccessible, preserved in brittle black cylinders that would crumble if anyone tried to open them. A few scrolls were successfully unrolled in the 19th and 20th centuries, using careful techniques. From these, scholars learned that the texts were incredibly varied. Some were business records documenting sales and purchases and debts. Some were personal letters written by Romans to friends and family. And some were philosophical texts copied for personal study. Some were literary works, but the vast majority remained unread. This represented an enormous gap in our historical knowledge. We had literary texts written by professional Roman authors, the works of Cicero, Seneca, Pliny, Tacitus, which gave us the perspectives of the educated elite. We had official inscriptions and monuments that recorded the deeds of emperors and generals. We had accounts written by later historians reflecting on Roman history, but we had very little direct access to what ordinary Romans thought, how ordinary commerce functioned, what ordinary people believed and cared about. The unread scrolls of Pompeii represented a potential window into the actual lived experience of Romans, into the reality of Roman society as experienced by the people living it, and not as filtered through the perspectives of the elite who wrote the literary texts that had survived. But that window remained sealed. The knowledge was there, but it was inaccessible. In recent years, advanced imaging technology and machine learning have changed this situation dramatically. Researchers realized that even though the scrolls could not be physically unrolled without destroying them, it might be possible to read what was written on them using non-invasive imaging techniques. The challenge was that the ink on the carbonized papyri was extremely faint. The heat of the eruption had darkened the papyrus itself, turning it nearly black. The ink, which had originally been black or dark colored, was difficult to distinguish from the blackened papyrus. When traditional imaging techniques were applied, the contrast between ink and papyrus was so low that the text was invisible. But advanced multispectral and hyperspectral imaging technology could capture images at many different wavelengths of light, including wavelengths invisible to the human eye. At certain wavelengths, the ink and the papyrus reflected light differently, creating contrast that was invisible in normal light but detectable in these other wavelengths. By capturing images at many wavelengths and then using computational analysis to enhance the contrast, researchers could make the faint text visible. Then, machine learning algorithms trained on images of known Roman texts could be applied to these images. The algorithms learned to recognize letter forms, to identify words, to read text even when it was faint or partially obscured. They could process images of entire scrolls, working through line after line of ancient Roman handwriting, extracting the text, converting the visual image into readable letters and words. This technology was initially developed and tested on scrolls that had already been partially unrolled, where small portions of the text were already known and could be used to train the algorithms. But once the algorithms were trained, they could be applied to scrolls that had never been opened, that had never been read before. The results were extraordinary. Text that had been sealed away for nearly 2,000 years became readable. Scrolls that had been sitting in museum collections, known to contain writing but inaccessible, suddenly yielded their secrets. Researchers could now read what Romans had written, could access their voices directly, could understand what they had recorded about their own lives. The first major revelation from the newly readable scrolls concerned Roman economics and how Roman commerce actually functioned in practice. The literary texts and official inscriptions had given scholars a certain picture of Roman economic organization, a hierarchical system where wealthy landowners and merchants controlled resources, where trade networks connected the empire, where money and commerce flowed through established channels. But the actual business documents revealed in the scrolls painted a far more complex and far more chaotic picture than this simple model suggested. The scrolls from the house of Jucundus contain detailed records of Jucundus's business activities. He was a banker and businessman who engaged in various economic activities, lending money, facilitating trade, buying and selling property, collecting debts. His account books, preserved in the scrolls, recorded transaction after transaction, debtor after debtor, deal after deal. What the machine learning analysis of these documents revealed was that Roman commerce was far messier, far less organized, far more dependent on personal relationships and informal agreements than the literary sources had suggested. The account books show that Jucundus was constantly negotiating with debtors, extending credit, making deals, working out arrangements. Many transactions were not based on fixed prices or standard terms, but were negotiated individually. Jucundus would lend money to one person at one interest rate to another person at a different rate, depending on his assessment of their credit worthiness, his personal relationship with them, his sense of how much risk was involved. This suggested that Roman commerce was not organized through formal markets with published prices and standardized terms, but through networks of personal relationships. To do business in Rome, you needed connections. You needed to be embedded in a web of relationships with other merchants, moneylenders, and business people who would trust you, extend credit to you, do deals with you. The formal economic system existed, but much of the actual economic activity happened in the informal economy, through personal networks and relationships. Furthermore, the documents revealed that default and debt were endemic to Roman commerce. Jucundus's records showed that many people owed him money, and many of them did not pay on time. Some people never paid at all. So some people paid partial amounts. Some people made complicated arrangements, paying back their debts over extended periods. The formal systems of law existed to deal with non-payment of debts, but in practice, much debt was handled through negotiation and informal arrangement rather than through formal legal proceedings. This painted a picture of Roman economics far less efficient, far less formal, far more dependent on personal relationships and informal arrangements than traditional historical accounts had suggested. It suggested that the gap between the wealthy elite and ordinary people was even more pronounced than scholars had realized, because access to credit and economic opportunity depended on your connections, on whether wealthy people like Jucundus were willing to lend to you and deal with you. More provocatively, the documents revealed that Roman economic mobility was limited. The same names appeared repeatedly in Jucundus's records over years, suggesting that the same people remained debtors to Jucundus across extended periods, unable to escape debt. Once you fell into debt to a wealthy person, it was very difficult to escape. You might spend years or decades paying back what you owed, enriching the wealthy person through the interest you paid and the extended obligation. This suggested that Roman society was even more hierarchically organized than previously understood, that economic inequality was even more entrenched, that ordinary people had very limited chances for economic advancement. The image of Rome as a meritocratic society where talented individuals could rise through commerce and business was contradicted by the actual documents showing most people locked into relationships of debt and obligation. Another major set of revelations came from personal letters found among the scrolls. These were not formal literary letters composed for posterity, like the published letters of Cicero or Pliny. These were actual personal correspondence, letters written by Romans to their family members, friends, and business associates, letters that were never intended to be preserved or read by the public. The content of these letters revealed something unexpected and somewhat unsettling about Roman family life. Roman families were characterized by emotional distance, formal hierarchy, and patterns of discipline and obedience that modern readers find striking and sometimes disturbing. Letters from husbands to wives were often imperious and commanding. Wives were expected to obey their husbands, to manage the household according to their husband's instructions, to raise children according to their husband's wishes. Some letters from husbands to wives contain instructions for household management, written in a tone that was more like instructions from a master to a servant than like communication between equals. Letters from parents to children revealed that parental authority was absolute and was often enforced through harsh discipline. Fathers who were away from home would write instructions to mothers about how to discipline children in their absence. Some letters discuss punishment, physical discipline, deprivation of food or privileges as methods of enforcing obedience and correct behavior. Letters between siblings and extended family members reveal complex hierarchies based on age, gender, and birth order. Younger siblings were expected to defer to older siblings. Daughters were subject to much stricter control and discipline than sons. Women's economic and personal freedom was severely limited. This was not entirely surprising to scholars, who understood that Roman society was patriarchal and hierarchical. But the personal letters revealed the emotional reality of these hierarchies in a way that literary sources and formal documents could not. They showed that Roman families were emotionally cold by modern standards, that hierarchy and obedience were enforced strictly, that love and affection existed but were expressed differently than in modern families, often in formal and restrained ways. More provocatively, some letters revealed gender violence and abuse. Some letters from husbands to wives contained threats or references to punishment. Some letters describe women being confined, restricted, or isolated as punishment for disobedience. Some letters discuss women being punished for perceived indiscretions, for speaking out of turn, for not following instructions. This suggested that Roman patriarchy was not just a system of formal male authority, but involved active enforcement of control through various forms of coercion, restriction, and abuse. While the most extreme forms of abuse may have been less common or less openly discussed, and the letters revealed that control over women's behavior and movement was an accepted and expected part of family life. Furthermore, analysis of letters involving inheritance and property revealed that women's access to economic resources was severely limited. Women typically inherited through male relatives, fathers, husbands, brothers. A woman's economic security depended entirely on her relationships with men. If a woman was widowed, she might be left in difficult circumstances unless she had a son who could protect her interests or male relatives willing to help her. The few women who did control significant property were unusual and often faced suspicion or criticism from their communities. This revealed that Roman women, despite having some legal rights and some ability to own property and conduct business, were fundamentally economically dependent on men and vulnerable to male control. The romantic image of some Roman women as empowered and independent, an image that had developed from literary sources about exceptional women like Pliny's wife, was contradicted by the reality revealed in the personal letters, which showed that most women's lives were tightly constrained by male control, and that their economic security depended entirely on their relationships with men. Perhaps the most startling revelations came from scrolls containing personal religious writings and personal spiritual reflections. These were not the official religion of the state, not the formal temples and official rituals recorded in inscriptions. These were the actual beliefs of ordinary Romans recorded in their personal writings. What the machine learning analysis revealed was that Roman religious belief was far more diverse, far more individual, and far less unified than the literary sources suggested. While the literary sources presented a unified Roman pantheon, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and other gods with clear attributes and roles, the personal writings revealed that individual Romans had very diverse spiritual beliefs and practices. Some Romans were deeply committed to the traditional gods and performed elaborate private rituals to honor them. Other Romans expressed skepticism about the gods, wrote about philosophical doubts regarding divine existence, or questioned whether the traditional gods actually intervene in human affairs. Some Romans had adopted foreign religions, worship of Isis and Osiris from Egypt, worship of Mithras, various mystery religions, and were deeply committed to these non-traditional belief systems. Some Romans expressed anxiety and fear about the divine, expressing worry that they had offended the gods, that they would be punished for violations of ritual or taboo. Some expressed sophisticated theological reflections on the nature of the divine, on whether gods were separate from the material world or permeated it, on whether fate was predetermined or whether humans had free will. This diversity of belief contradicted the image of Roman religion as a unified, coherent system shared by all Romans. It revealed that Romans, like people in all times and places, had individual spiritual beliefs and practices that did not necessarily conform to official doctrine. Some were orthodox believers in the traditional gods, some were skeptics, some had adopted foreign religions, some were trying to synthesize different beliefs into a coherent personal worldview. More provocatively, some of the scrolls contained what could be interpreted as magical practices and superstitions. Some Romans recorded spells, incantations, and magical formulas that they believed could influence events or control the behavior of others. Some recorded beliefs in protective amulets, lucky items, or rituals that could ward off evil. Some recorded practices that would be classified today as folk magic or superstition. This suggested that the boundary between official Roman religion and folk practices, between orthodox belief and superstition, was not as sharp as traditional accounts had suggested. Educated Romans, people of some wealth and status like Jucundus and his circle, believed in and practiced things that official religion and sophisticated philosophy would not endorse. The unified rational worldview attributed to Romans by later historians was contradicted by the actual beliefs and practices revealed in personal writings. Additionally, the letters reveal something striking about Roman attitudes toward death and the afterlife. The literary sources, philosophical texts, and formal funeral inscriptions suggested that educated Romans had a somewhat resigned attitude toward death, viewing it as a natural end to life or as a transition to some form of continued existence. But personal letters revealed that Romans of all classes experienced considerable anxiety about death. They recorded fears about dying, anxieties about what would happen to their families after they died, saved desperate hopes that something of them would survive after death. Some of these anxieties were addressed through religion, belief in the gods, hope that the gods would protect them or grant them some form of afterlife. Some were addressed through the creation of memory, by ensuring that their names would be remembered, that their deeds would be recorded, that their families would honor their memory. Some Romans recorded explicit instructions for their funerals and for how they wanted to be remembered, suggesting that the permanence of their memory was deeply important to them. This revealed that Romans, despite their sophistication and despite their religious and philosophical frameworks, experienced the universal human anxieties about mortality and meaning. They wanted to matter, wanted to be remembered, wanted to believe that their lives had significance and that something of them would survive after death. The scrolls also contain information about local politics and power structures in Pompeii, information that challenged some of the assumptions scholars had made about how Roman society was organized and how power actually functioned. The literary sources presented Roman government as a formal system with clear hierarchies, with power flowing downward from the emperor through provincial governors and local magistrates. But the personal letters revealed that power in practice was far messier, far more dependent on personal relationships and factional alliances, far less centralized than the formal system suggested. Local officials in Pompeii had significant autonomy in how they governed. They made decisions about tax collection, as about the administration of justice, about public works and building projects. But these decisions were not made in isolation. Local officials had to maintain relationships with wealthy landowners and merchants, with the military garrison stationed in the region, with the community of other officials and administrators. Power was exercised through networks of patronage and alliance, where wealthy and powerful people supported local officials and in return received favorable treatment and access to power. Furthermore, the letters revealed that corruption and self-enrichment were endemic to the system. Officials used their positions to enrich themselves, to distribute favors to allies, to accumulate wealth and power. The formal rules and regulations existed, but in practice, officials had substantial freedom to bend them, as to make exceptions for allies, to use their power for personal gain. This was not seen as particularly wrong or unusual. It was understood to be how the system functioned. Some letters contain explicit references to bribes, to payments made to officials in exchange for favorable decisions. Some contain references to officials as using their position to acquire land or property at favorable prices, or to extract payments from people who came before them for justice or administrative decisions. The system functioned through networks of obligation and mutual benefit, where wealthy people benefited from their relationships with officials, and officials benefited from the wealth and support of wealthy people. This revealed that Roman politics, despite its formal structures and despite the mythology of republican virtue or imperial stability, was fundamentally corrupt and faction-ridden. Power was not exercised according to abstract rules or principles, but according to networks of personal relationships and mutual benefit. People with power used that power to enrich themselves and their allies. People without power sought to develop relationships with powerful people who might help them. Moreover, the letters revealed significant tension and conflict within Pompeii's community. There were factions of wealthy families competing for influence and power. There were disputes over property and resources. There were conflicts between local officials and between officials and merchants. The community was fractious, competitive, full of tensions that threatened to erupt into open conflict. This suggested that beneath the surface of Roman order and stability, beneath the formal structures of law and government, there was considerable instability and conflict. Communities like Pompeii were held together by the authority of Rome and by the balance of power between competing factions of wealthy people. But that balance was fragile, constantly threatened by disputes and rivalries. The scrolls also contained information about everyday life that contradicted some of the romanticized images scholars had developed about Roman life. Some scrolls contained personal medical writings, descriptions of illnesses, records of treatments attempted, spiritual reflections on health and disease. These revealed that Romans, despite their medical knowledge and despite the existence of professional physicians in major cities, experienced frequent illness and had very limited ability to treat or cure most diseases. People suffered from infections, from parasitic diseases, from chronic illnesses. Some people recorded trying various treatments, herbal remedies, bloodletting, prayers to healing gods, with limited success. Some people recorded the deaths of family members from illness, recorded the helplessness they felt watching loved ones suffer and die from diseases that medicine could not cure. Life expectancy was low. While some people lived into their 60s or 70s, many people died much younger. Childhood mortality was significant. Women often died in childbirth or shortly after. People in their 30s and 40s might suffer from chronic illnesses that severely limited their ability to work and engage in life. Some scrolls contain records of diet and food, revealing that ordinary people ate quite limited diets. They ate bread, which was their staple food. They ate beans and legumes. They occasionally ate meat, which was expensive and reserved for special occasions or for the wealthy. They ate vegetables when available. They ate very little fresh fruit. The diet was adequate for survival, but was monotonous and lacking in variety. Physical labor was constant and exhausting. People worked long hours in fields if they were agricultural workers, in shops and businesses if they were merchants or craftspeople, in households if they were servants or slaves. The workday began at dawn and continued until dark. Physical strain and injury were common. Many people by middle age were damaged by a lifetime of physical labor, suffering from arthritis and other chronic conditions that made further work painful and difficult. This revealed that despite the sophistication of Roman culture, despite the engineering achievements and the literary accomplishments, the everyday life of most Romans was characterized by hardship, by disease, by limited diet, by exhausting labor. The image of Roman leisure and sophistication applied only to a tiny elite. For the vast majority of people, life was difficult. Perhaps one of the most significant revelations came from scrolls that discuss slavery and the enslaved population of Pompeii. The literary sources had acknowledged that Rome depended on slavery, that enslaved people were numerous and essential to the economy. But the personal letters and documents revealed the stunning scale of slavery and the brutal reality of enslaved life in ways that formal sources could not convey. So some letters discuss the buying and selling of enslaved people, treating these transactions as routine business. Some discuss the use of enslaved people as laborers on properties, as servants in households, as workers in businesses and commercial enterprises. Some discuss the sexual use of enslaved people, including the systematic sexual abuse of enslaved children. Some documents recorded the branding of enslaved people, the use of chains and restraints, the harsh discipline used to maintain control. Some recorded punishments inflicted on enslaved people for disobedience or escape attempts, beatings, mutilation, execution. Some letters revealed the psychological dynamics of slavery, the sense of absolute power that enslavers felt, the entitlement to use enslaved people's bodies in labor without restraint, the casual cruelty that could be inflicted without consequence because enslaved people had no legal protection or recourse. At the same time, some letters revealed the humanity and resilience of enslaved people. Some letters discuss people forming relationships with each other, maintaining family bonds despite the constant threat of sale and separation. Some discuss people attempting to escape, attempting to resist their in whatever ways they could. Some discuss people gaining small degrees of freedom or privilege through their labor or through relationships with enslavers. But overall, the documents revealed that Rome was brutal, systematic, and fundamental to the functioning of society. Enslaved people were not a small minority, but were numerous, perhaps comprising as much as 30 to 40% of the population in some regions. The wealth that the Roman elite accumulated, the leisure they enjoyed, the luxury goods they consumed were all built on the labor of enslaved people who had no freedom, no rights, and no hope of improvement in their circumstances. This revelation was particularly striking when considered alongside the earlier revelations about the economic dependence and political powerlessness of free people. If free people struggled with debt and economic dependence, if they had limited access to power and had to maintain relationships with the wealthy and powerful to survive, then the position of enslaved people was infinitely worse. They had even fewer resources, even fewer protections, even less ability to resist or escape their situation. The scrolls revealed that Roman society was built on multiple tiers of exploitation, enslaved people at the bottom with no rights or freedoms, free but poor people above them, dependent on wealthy people for survival, and a wealthy elite at the top, accumulating wealth through the exploitation of everyone below them. The revelation of the Pompeian scrolls through machine learning raises important questions about technology, interpretation, and historical understanding, questions that echo those raised by the Rosetta Stone, but in new forms. Machine learning algorithms can identify patterns in data that humans might miss. They can process vast quantities of information quickly, can recognize letter forms and faint or degraded text. They can extract information that would be difficult or impossible for humans to extract through traditional methods. In this sense, machine learning has performed a remarkable service. It has made accessible thousands of texts that would otherwise have remained sealed and unreadable. But machine learning also has limitations and biases. The algorithms must be trained on known examples of text to learn to recognize letters and words. If the training data is biased, if it includes more examples from certain types of text or certain time periods, the algorithm may perform better on some texts than others. The algorithm may struggle with handwriting that is unusual or different from the training examples. The algorithm may misidentify letters or words, and especially in degraded or faint text where human judgment might recognize ambiguity, but the algorithm makes a definitive and possibly wrong choice. Furthermore, once the machine learning algorithm has extracted text from an image, that extracted text must still be interpreted. The algorithm can identify what letters or words are present, but human interpretation is still required to understand what those words mean, to understand their context, to understand their significance. Some of the scrolls are straightforward, accounting records with clear numbers and names, but many are ambiguous. Letters may be written in shorthand or abbreviations that are difficult to expand or interpret. Some words may be unusual or may use archaic vocabulary. Some passages may be unclear or may have multiple possible interpretations. Says, machine learning can extract the text, but humans must still interpret it. Furthermore, the selection of which scrolls to analyze using machine learning involves choices. There are thousands of carbonized scrolls in museums around the world. Resources are limited. Researchers must choose which scrolls to analyze. These choices may be influenced by various factors: which scrolls are most accessible, which are thought to be most important, which museums are most willing to cooperate with research projects. The result is that some texts are analyzed and some are not, and the analysis may be biased towards certain types of text or certain perspectives. This means that the picture of Roman society revealed by the Pompeian scrolls is not a complete or unbiased picture. It is a picture constructed through the analysis of a selected subset of texts, using algorithms with particular capabilities and limitations, interpreted by human scholars with their own perspectives and assumptions. This is not to say that the revelations are false or unreliable. The evidence is genuine. The texts are authentic. The meanings extracted from them are real. But it is to say that this is one interpretation, one perspective on Roman society, constructed through particular methodologies and particular choices about what to analyze and how to interpret it. A different selection of scrolls or a different approach to analyzing them might reveal different patterns and different conclusions. The Roman society revealed through machine learning analysis of the Pompeian scrolls is a more complex and less idealizing picture than earlier scholarly accounts, but it is still a constructed picture, not a direct and unmediated access to Roman reality. The revelations from the Pompeian scrolls, analyzed through machine learning, raise profound questions about historical understanding and about what it means to know the past. For centuries, scholars' understanding of Roman society was based primarily on literary sources, on texts written by professional authors like Cicero, Seneca, Pliny, Tacitus, and later historians. These texts were preserved because they were valued, because they were copied and recopied across the centuries, because institutions like the church and later secular libraries deemed them important enough to preserve. But these texts were not representative of Roman society as a whole. They represented the perspectives of an educated elite, of people with leisure time to write and the literacy to express themselves in sophisticated language. They represented formal documents, legal texts, philosophical arguments, historical narratives meant for public consumption. They did not represent the everyday thoughts of ordinary people, the actual functioning of commerce and politics, the personal beliefs and fears of people going about their daily lives. Because scholars had to rely on these literary sources, the picture they developed of Roman society was skewed toward the perspectives and values of the educated elite. Roman civilization was understood as the achievements of great men, generals, philosophers, emperors. So Roman culture was understood through its greatest literary and architectural accomplishments. The everyday reality of ordinary Romans, including the vast majority of the population who left no written record, was largely invisible. The Pompeian scrolls provide a counterweight to this bias. They give voice to ordinary Romans, to people engaged in commerce and daily life, to people writing in haste about immediate concerns rather than composing carefully for posterity. They reveal the reality of Roman society in ways that the literary sources could not. But this raises an important question. Is the reality revealed by the Pompeian scrolls the true reality of Roman society? Or is it simply a different perspective, a different set of biases, a different partial view of a complex whole? The Pompeian scrolls come from a specific city at a specific moment in time. Pompeii was preserved by a volcanic eruption in 79 AD, so the scrolls reflect Roman society at that moment. But Roman society evolved over centuries. The reality of Rome in the 2nd century BC was different from the reality in the 2nd century AD. The reality in Rome itself was different from the reality in provincial cities. The reality for wealthy people was different from the reality for poor people. The reality for men was different from the reality for women. Moreover, even the scrolls from Pompeii are not a complete record. We have the scrolls that survive, but many scrolls did not survive the volcanic eruption. We have scrolls from some houses and some individuals, but not from all. The scrolls that survived and have been analyzed are a selected subset of even this incomplete collection. So the picture of Roman society revealed by the Pompeian scrolls is a real picture, based on authentic evidence, but it is still a partial picture, a snapshot of one city at one moment in time, filtered through the survival and selection of certain texts and through the interpretive choices of modern scholars using modern technology. This is true of all historical understanding. We can never have direct access to the past. We only have fragments, texts that survive, artifacts that were preserved, biological remains that can be analyzed. From these fragments, we construct narratives about what the past was like. Different scholars, using different fragments and different methodologies, may construct different narratives. The Pompeian scrolls show us a Rome that is messier, more corrupt, more brutal, more full of conflict and inequality than the idealized literary sources had suggested. This is a valuable correction to earlier historical understanding. But it is not the final word on Roman society. It is one perspective, one interpretation, one way of understanding a complex historical reality. The success of machine learning in reading the Pompeian scrolls raises a tantalizing question. What other sealed knowledge awaits discovery using similar technologies? There are thousands of carbonized papyri in museums around the world that have not yet been analyzed. There may be texts containing knowledge, scientific, medical, literary, historical, that has been lost for nearly 2,000 years. There may be personal writings from other Romans that could reveal perspectives and experiences different from those found in the Pompeii collection. There may be texts in languages other than Latin or Greek from other ancient civilizations that could be recovered using similar technologies. Beyond carbonized papyri, there are other forms of sealed or inaccessible texts. Ancient manuscripts that are too fragile to open. Texts written in invisible inks that can only be revealed through advanced imaging. Texts carved into stone surfaces where the carving is so worn that the letters are almost invisible to the human eye but might be detectable through multispectral imaging and AI analysis. Text on clay tablets or pottery shards where only fragments survive. The technologies developed to read the Pompeian scrolls, multispectral imaging, machine learning algorithms trained to recognize ancient handwriting, computational analysis of degraded or faint texts can potentially be applied to many other archaeological materials. As these technologies improve, as algorithms become more sophisticated, as researchers develop new techniques, more sealed knowledge may become accessible. This raises profound questions about what we will learn about the ancient world as these technologies develop. What if we discover that ancient people were more literate than we thought? What if we find evidence that challenges our understanding of ancient civilizations? What if we uncover knowledge that was previously lost? Scientific understanding, mathematical knowledge, literary works that have been unknown for centuries? The Pompeian scrolls have already forced a reassessment of Roman society. What will the next generation of discoveries reveal? What sealed knowledge awaits us in the archaeological record? The recovery of the Pompeian scrolls through machine learning raises a profound philosophical question. What does it mean to recover lost voices? What does it mean to hear from people who lived nearly 2,000 years ago, who have been dead for 2 millennia, whose names we do not know, whose lives were forgotten? When we read a letter written by a Roman whose name is not recorded, we are reading the actual words of an actual human being who experienced hopes and fears, who cared about people, who worried about the future, who worked and struggled and loved and suffered. We are hearing a voice that would have been lost forever if the volcano had not erupted, if the letters had not been preserved, if technology had not advanced to allow us to read them. This is profound. It is a recovery of human dignity, a recognition that ordinary people's thoughts and experiences matter, that they deserve to be heard and remembered. It is a correction to the historical record, which for centuries has recorded only the words of the elite, while the voices of ordinary people have been silent. At the same time, there is something troubling about this recovery. We are reading private letters, personal communications that were never intended to be read by the public, never intended to be preserved for posterity. We are intruding on the private lives of people who lived nearly 2,000 years ago. We are using technology to violate the privacy that these people thought was safe from the sealed letters and personal documents we are reading. Moreover, by reading these letters through the lens of modern technology and modern scholarship, we are interpreting them through modern frameworks. We are asking modern questions. We are reading modern meanings into ancient words. The Romans who wrote these letters could not have imagined that their private thoughts would be read by thousands of people nearly 2,000 years later using technologies that would seem like magic. They could not have imagined the interpretations we would place on their words, the meanings we would extract from their letters, the conclusions we would draw about their society. Is the Roman society we are discovering through the Pompeian scrolls the actual Roman society as Romans experienced it, or is it a construction, a reading of ancient texts through modern frameworks? That's a projection of modern concerns and modern interpretations onto ancient voices. This is the fundamental problem of historical understanding. We can recover voices from the past, can access the words of people who lived centuries ago, but we cannot fully escape our own time, our own perspectives, our own frameworks of understanding. We always interpret the past through the lens of the present. The best we can do is to be aware of this problem, to try to minimize our projections and interpretations, to try to listen to what ancient voices are trying to tell us rather than forcing them to say what we want them to say. We can try to understand Romans on their own terms, within their own worldview and framework, rather than judging them by modern standards. We can try to hear what they are actually saying rather than what we expect them to say. The Pompeian scrolls, read through machine learning analysis, give us access to Roman voices that we did not have before. They allow us to hear perspectives and experiences that were previously inaccessible, but they also confront us with the fundamental challenge of historical understanding, the challenge of hearing voices from the past without imposing our own meanings onto them, of recovering ancient wisdom without losing sight of how different the ancient world was from our own. One final implication of the Pompeian scrolls deserves attention: what they reveal about human nature and about patterns in human behavior that seem to transcend time and culture. The Pompeian scrolls reveal a society characterized by hierarchy, inequality, exploitation, and the abuse of power. They reveal corruption, self-enrichment, the use of power for personal gain. They reveal the subordination of women, of enslaved people, the routine brutality of a system built. They reveal factionalism, conflict, and competition among the powerful. They reveal that ordinary people struggle with debt, with economic dependence, with the vulnerability that comes from lacking power and resources. These patterns are not unique to Rome. They appear in ancient Egypt, as revealed by the analysis of Çatalhöyük bones and the study of pharaonic civilization. They appear in ancient Mesopotamia, in ancient China, in ancient Mesoamerica. They appear in medieval Europe, in early modern societies, in modern societies today. They appear across cultures and across centuries. This suggests that the patterns of hierarchy, inequality, exploitation, and the abuse of power are not accidents or deviations from how human society could be organized. They appear to be fundamental patterns in how humans organize themselves when societies become complex, when resources become concentrated, when power becomes centralized. This is a sobering realization. It suggests that the patterns we see in modern society, inequality, exploitation, the concentration of wealth and power, are not new phenomena introduced by capitalism or by recent historical developments. They are ancient patterns rooted in human nature, reproduced across centuries and cultures. Some scholars interpret this as evidence that hierarchy and inequality are inevitable aspects of human social organization, that we are built for dominance and subordination, that utopian visions of egalitarian societies are fundamentally unrealistic because they conflict with human nature, but others interpret the evidence differently. They note that while hierarchy and inequality do appear across many societies, the specific forms they take vary. Some societies have been less hierarchical than others. Some societies have found ways to limit the abuse of power and to constrain inequality. The patterns may be recurring, but they are not absolutely determined. There is room for variation, for societies to organize themselves in different ways, to limit inequality and abuse of power through institutions and laws and cultural values that constrain the worst excesses. What the Pompeian scrolls reveal ultimately is that we are not so different from Romans. We face the same temptations to abuse power, had the same tendency to organize ourselves hierarchically, the same capacity for both cooperation and cruelty. We can learn from their failures, can see in the Pompeian documents examples of how exploitation and abuse of power create suffering and instability. We can ask ourselves whether we want to reproduce the patterns that characterize Roman society, or whether we want to build something different. The scrolls do not give us answers. They give us evidence, perspectives, voices from the past. What we do with that evidence, how we interpret it, what lessons we draw from it. These are questions that each generation must answer for itself. The Pompeian scrolls, sealed by a volcanic eruption in 79 AD and revealed nearly 2,000 years later through the application of machine learning and advanced imaging technology, have fundamentally changed our understanding of Roman society. They have given voice to ordinary Romans whose perspectives and experiences were previously invisible in the historical record. They have revealed a society that is messier, more corrupt, more brutal, and more unequal than earlier scholarly accounts had suggested. They have shown us that Romans were subject to the same weaknesses, the same vulnerabilities, the same human tendencies toward hierarchy and exploitation that characterize human societies across time and place. But beyond what these scrolls reveal about Rome specifically, they reveal something profound about historical understanding itself. They show us that history is constantly being rewritten as new evidence emerges and new technologies allow us to access information that was previously sealed away. They show us that our understanding of the past is never complete, never final, always subject to revision as new voices emerge and new perspectives become visible. The Pompeian scrolls remind us that there is always more to know, always more voices to hear, always more layers to uncover. They remind us that technology can be a tool for recovering lost knowledge and lost voices. They remind us that the past is not a fixed, finished thing, but something that we are constantly discovering and rediscovering, constantly interpreting and reinterpreting. As machine learning and advanced imaging technologies continue to develop, as researchers continue to apply these technologies to ancient materials, we can expect many more discoveries. More sealed knowledge will become accessible. More ancient voices will be heard. More aspects of the past will be revealed, challenging what we thought we knew, forcing us to revise our understanding, showing us that history is far more complex and far more fascinating than any single account can capture. The Pompeian scrolls, carbonized by volcanic heat nearly 2,000 years ago, have something important to tell us. not just about Roman society, but about knowledge and time and the fragility and resilience of human experience. The dead do not have to remain silent. The lost does not have to stay lost. If we have the tools and the will to listen, the voices of the past can speak to us across the centuries. And in listening, we may learn something essential about ourselves, about human nature, about what it means to be human in a world where power is wielded, where inequality exists, where people struggle and suffer, but also love and create meaning. The scrolls of Pompeii are not just artifacts, they are voices. And now, finally, after nearly 2,000 years, we can hear them.